She told me I was going to fail her class.
It's time.
But then she smiled and said something I'll never forget. Unless you pass with me. That moment changed everything. I still remember the weight of that afternoon, as if the air itself had turned heavy. The classroom had emptied, chairs pushed back with careless screeches, the faint smell of dry erase markers lingering in the air. I lingered too, stuffing books into my bag more slowly than usual because I knew what was coming. "Stay for a moment," she said, her voice low but firm. Not loud. She never had to be loud. When she spoke, people listened. I turned toward her desk. She was sitting with perfect posture, her hands folded neatly on top of a stack of papers. The desk lamp glowed against her silk blouse, making the fabric shimmer faintly, and for a second, I forgot this was about my grades at all. Then her eyes met mine, steady and unflinching, and the knot in my stomach tightened. "You know you're on the edge of failing this class," she said. Her tone carried the kind of authority that pressed down on you. Not cruel, but absolute. I dropped my gaze to the floor, feeling like a kid again, despite the fact that I wasn't. I was 22. I'd handled plenty of things in my life. But somehow, standing in front of her, I felt stripped down, exposed. "I'm trying," I muttered, almost defensively. "I don't doubt that." She leaned back in her chair, and the movement was subtle but commanding. She crossed one leg over the other, and for a moment, I caught the faintest scent of her perfume, something floral, delicate, but grounding at the same time. "Trying isn't enough anymore. You're running out of time." Her words stung more than I expected. Maybe because they were true. Maybe because the calmness in her voice made them impossible to argue with. I looked up, expecting to see disappointment. Instead, I saw something else. Her expression softened. Not much. Just enough for the tension in her eyes to loosen. And then she smiled. It wasn't wide, not playful in a careless way, but deliberate, controlled. A smile that lingered long enough to blur the meaning behind it. "Unless you pass with me," she said. I blinked, unsure if I had heard her right. The words hung in the air, floating somewhere between encouragement and something else entirely. Her smile didn't fade. If anything, it deepened. I swallowed hard, my chest tightening. What do you mean?" She tilted her head, studying me in silence for a beat too long, her pen twirling slowly between her fingers. "It means," she said finally, "that if you want to pass, you'll need to meet me halfway. Extra sessions. After class. My time is limited, but if you're serious, I'll give it to you." The way she said it, slow, deliberate, her eyes locked on mine, made the room feel smaller, like the walls were closing in. I nodded, though my throat was dry. Her smile softened again, this time warmer, almost kind. "Good. Then we'll see what you're really capable of." And just like that, she dismissed me with a wave of her hand, turning back to her papers as if nothing unusual had happened. But as I walked out of that room, my pulse still racing, I knew something had shifted. I wasn't just her struggling student anymore. I was something more. The first time I stayed after class for one of her extra sessions, I expected it to feel like detention, awkward, heavy, maybe even humiliating. Instead, it felt different. The kind of different that made me pay attention to every detail, as though each second mattered more than it should. The library at that hour was nearly deserted. Most of the fluorescent lights had been switched off, leaving only a few lamps scattered across the room. Their soft, amber glow spilled across the long wooden tables, catching the edges of the books stacked like quiet guardians around us. There was a hum in the background, the tired air conditioner pushing stale air, and the faint smell of paper and dust. She was already waiting when I arrived, her hair pulled back in a loose bun that made her look less like a professor and more like a woman simply caught in a quiet moment. She gestured for me to sit across from her. No unnecessary words, just that graceful flick of her hand that carried more authority than most people's speeches. We started with my notes. She slid them across the table, pointing out mistakes with the tip of her pen. Her handwriting was sharp, precise, every correction made in bold red. But her voice was softer than it had been in class. She didn't lecture. She guided. Patient, measured, and, though she might not admit it, encouraging. At one point, she leaned across the table to mark something on my page. The sleeve of her blouse brushed against my arm. It was the lightest touch, almost accidental, but my whole body noticed it. I sat still, afraid to move, afraid she'd notice how aware I was of that fleeting contact. She finished the correction and sat back, her eyes finding mine. "Better," she said, her lips curving ever so slightly. I nodded, but I couldn't stop staring at her hands. How steady they were, how her nails were neatly kept but not painted, how her fingers moved with the kind of elegance that comes from habit, from control. When she handed me another paper, our fingers met. Not a full touch, just a brush of skin against skin. But she didn't pull away right away. The pause was there, barely a second, maybe less, but long enough for me to feel the warmth of her. Long enough to wonder if she felt mine. "You have potential," she said quietly, almost as if she were speaking more to herself than to me. Her eyes softened in a way I hadn't seen before, like the sharpness she wore in class had been set aside for something else. Something she didn't show just anyone. The session stretched longer than I expected. Hours seemed to dissolve into the quiet turning of pages, the scratch of pens, and those rare moments when her hand rested briefly on my shoulder as she leaned in to guide me through a problem. Each time, the touch was professional, innocent, but inside it left ripples I couldn't calm. When we finally packed up, the library felt even quieter, as though the silence itself was holding its breath. She closed her folder, straightened her chair, and gave me a look that I couldn't quite read. Part approval, part challenge, and maybe, just maybe, part curiosity. "Same time tomorrow," she said, her tone clipped back into professionalism. But the way her eyes lingered, just a second longer than necessary, told me the truth. Whatever this was, it wasn't just about passing a class anymore. By the third week of those evening sessions, something had shifted. At first, it had just been about notes, assignments, and corrections. But the more time we spent in that quiet library corner, the more I began to see her. Not just the teacher, not just the authority figure, but the woman behind it all. That night, the rain tapped steadily against the tall glass windows, a rhythm that filled the silence between us. The library was nearly empty, just the distant sound of the janitor's cart rolling down the hall. I was working through a problem she'd assigned, my pen scratching nervously against the page, when I noticed her staring. Not at the book in front of her, but out the window. Her expression was distant, not stern, not calculating, but almost fragile. Her chin rested lightly against her hand, and for once, her posture wasn't perfect. There was a looseness to her shoulders, a small surrender in the way she leaned against the table. "Are you all right?" I asked before I could stop myself. She blinked, as if she'd forgotten I was even there, then gave a faint smile. "I'm fine." But her voice lacked its usual conviction. I set my pen down, waiting. I didn't press her. I just let the silence sit, as if it could invite honesty more than questions ever could. Finally, she sighed. Sometimes I wonder if I chose right." Her words surprised me. She almost never spoke about herself. In class, she was an unshakable presence, every answer precise, every movement deliberate. Now, though, she sounded unsure. "Human. Chose what?" I asked softly. She tilted her head toward the window, eyes following the rain streaking down the glass. "This. Teaching. Devoting so much of myself to it. Don't misunderstand. I love it. I do. But there are days when I wonder what I gave up for it." Her fingers traced the edge of a page in front of her, absent, thoughtful. Companionship. Family. Things I told myself could wait until they couldn't. Her confession lingered in the air, fragile and raw. For the first time, I saw her vulnerability not as a crack in her strength, but as part of it. She was letting me see what others probably never did. I wanted to say something reassuring, something meaningful, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I shifted closer. Not much, just enough that our knees brushed beneath the table. The contact was subtle, but undeniable. Warm. Real. She didn't pull away. Her gaze flickered toward me, surprise flashing for an instant, before softening into something I couldn't name. There was no lecture, no correction, no reminder of the roles we were supposed to play. Only silence, and the quiet acceptance of closeness neither of us could dismiss anymore. I didn't push further. I didn't need to. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can offer isn't an answer, but presence. Sitting there, listening to the rain, feeling her knee rest lightly against mine, I realized something. She wasn't just letting me learn her subject. She was letting me learn her. And in that moment, I wasn't just her student anymore. I was her confidant. The session started stretching longer. What began as an hour of review became 2, sometimes 3. The clock would creep past 8, the library emptying around us, until it felt like the whole place belonged only to her and me. I told myself I was there for the work, for the grades, for the chance to prove I could succeed. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the whole truth anymore. Every time she leaned across the table, every time her sleeve brushed against my arm, every time her hand lingered on my shoulder just a second too long, it was something more, something neither of us dared to name. One evening, she was helping me work through an essay draft. She stood behind me, leaning over my chair, her hand resting lightly on the backrest as she pointed to a sentence. Her hair slipped from its bun, brushing my cheek as she leaned closer. The faint warmth of her breath grazed my ear as she spoke softly, and suddenly I couldn't hear her words. Not really. All I could hear was the rhythm of my own heartbeat, loud and unsteady. I turned slightly, and, for a moment, we were too close. Her eyes met mine, and neither of us moved. The distance between us could have been erased with the smallest shift. But just as quickly, she straightened, adjusting her blouse as though regaining her composure. "You're improving," she said, her tone returning to that careful professionalism. But I noticed her hands still resting on the back of my chair, her fingers tapping lightly, as though undecided. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to focus on the paper in front of me. "It's only because of you." Her lips curved just barely. Not the sharp, teasing smile she wore when she wanted control, but something softer. "Don't underestimate yourself," she murmured. That night, even the silences between us felt charged. When I handed her a notebook, her fingers brushed mine and lingered, the contact deliberate this time. A pause stretched between us, too long to be accidental, too brief to be an admission. She laughed at something I said later, an unguarded laugh, genuine, the kind that lit her whole face. And without thinking, she reached out and placed her hand gently on my arm. The touch was light, but it burned through me. I wanted her to leave it there forever. Instead, she pulled back almost immediately, catching herself, her eyes dropping to the table. The restraint between us was almost unbearable. It was like standing on the edge of something vast, knowing one step would change everything. And yet, every night, neither of us turned away. When I left the library that evening, the cool night air did nothing to steady me. I walked home replaying every glance, every brush of her hand, every second she let her guard slip. We were building something dangerous, something undeniable. And the more she tried to hold it back, the more certain I became that she felt it too. It was late, later than either of us realized. We had been buried in notes for hours, her pen tapping rhythmically against the edge of my notebook, my handwriting smudged from the pressure of rewriting draft after draft. The library was silent except for us. Outside, the sky had turned a deep blue, the kind that announces night is here to stay. And then, without warning, the power flickered. The overhead lights buzzed once, twice, and then cut out completely, plunging the room into a dim wash of moonlight spilling through the high windows. I froze, the sudden darkness disorienting, but she didn't panic. She simply exhaled, a small, tired laugh escaping her lips. "Well," she murmured, I guess that's our signal to stop." But neither of us moved. The silence deepened, heavy but not uncomfortable. I could see her only in outlines, the curve of her jaw, the faint shimmer of her blouse catching the pale glow of the moon. She bent to gather her papers, and one slipped to the floor. Without thinking, I bent too. Our hands collided in the dark, both reaching for the same page. The shock of her touch was immediate, warm, steady, and trembling just slightly. My fingers closed around the paper, but hers didn't withdraw. For a moment, we were both frozen there, crouched on the library floor, hand against hand. Her breath caught, quiet, but I heard it, felt it. I looked up, and though the moonlight revealed only fragments of her face, I could see her eyes, wide and searching. We stayed like that longer than we should have, my hand beneath hers, neither of us daring to pull away. "You shouldn't," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. "Neither should you," I whispered back. The words hung between us, fragile and dangerous. My heart raced, not from fear, but from the undeniable truth of it. We were standing at a line we had both drawn, both respected, until now. Slowly, she let the page slip from her grasp, but her palm stayed against mine. She turned her hand slightly, not holding, not gripping, but resting, choosing. Her breathing was uneven, and mine wasn't much better. The library felt too quiet, as if the entire world had stepped aside to watch. I could feel the warmth of her skin, the faint tremor running through her hand, and beneath it, the weight of everything unsaid. Finally, she pulled back, not abruptly, not with regret, but carefully, like peeling away from something that mattered too much. She stood, gathering the papers with deliberate precision, her composure returning piece by piece. But when she looked at me again, her voice faltered. "We can't," she started, then stopped. And yet her eyes told a different story. They told me that she had felt it too, the spark, the closeness, the breaking point we had just crossed. As I walked home that night, the memory of her hand in mine refused to fade. For the first time, I knew this wasn't just tension. It was desire, and neither of us could ignore it any longer. The next evening, she didn't begin with books or notes. The moment I sat down, I knew something was different. Her papers were stacked neatly to the side, untouched. She folded her hands over them and looked at me with an expression I had never seen before, equal parts steady and uncertain. "We need to talk," she said quietly. My chest tightened. I braced myself for what I thought she would say, that our sessions had gone too far, that I should stop coming, that we should pretend none of it had happened. But instead of pushing me away, she hesitated. And that hesitation told me everything. She drew in a slow breath, her fingers lacing together as if holding herself still. "What happened last night?" Her voice trailed off. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if searching for strength, then met my gaze again. "I shouldn't have let it happen. But the truth is, I've been thinking about it far longer than I should admit." Her confession hit me like a current. My pulse surged, my throat tightening with words I couldn't find. She pressed on, her tone softer now, almost fragile. "You make me feel—" She paused, shaking her head faintly. "You make me feel something I haven't in years. And that terrifies me, because I'm supposed to be the one with boundaries. I'm supposed to know better." Her honesty cracked something open in me. I leaned forward, my elbows resting on the table, my voice low but certain. "Do you think you're the only one who's scared? Every time you touch my hand, every time you look at me like that, I can't stop thinking about you. And I don't want to." Her eyes softened, and I caught the faintest quiver in her lips before she steadied herself. She reached across the table, her hand hesitating in the air before finally settling on mine. Her touch was warm, grounding, her thumb brushing gently over my knuckles. "If this continues," she whispered, "it can't be reckless. It can't be about curiosity or rebellion. It has to matter. It has to be real." I nodded, swallowing hard. "It already is." Silence followed, but it wasn't heavy. It was filled with the steady thrum of our breathing, the muted hum of the air conditioner, and the pulse of something new, something honest between us. Her gaze didn't waver. "Do you understand what this means? The risk? The questions people would ask?" "I do," I said, my voice firm even though my heart pounded. "But I don't care. Not if it means losing the chance to know you. Really know you." For the first time, she smiled. Not the playful smile she wore when she tested me. Not the polite smile of a teacher encouraging her student. This one was small, tender, unguarded. She squeezed my hand gently, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Then maybe we stop pretending we don't feel this." The words were simple, but they changed everything. That night, I didn't just leave the library with notes and corrections. I left knowing that what bound us now wasn't duty or obligation. It was choice. The final exam came and went faster than I thought it would. For weeks, every night had been a blur of pages, notes, late study sessions, and moments that lingered longer than they should have. And then suddenly, it was over. The test in front of me, the answers flowing, her voice in the back of my mind reminding me of what we'd worked on together. When she handed me my graded paper a week later, it was in front of everyone. She didn't say a word, didn't let her eyes linger. Just placed it on my desk with the same practiced calm she always carried. But when I turned it over and saw the mark at the top, bold, undeniable, a pass, I felt my chest swell with more than just relief. For the rest of the class, I tried not to look at her, tried not to let the pride, the gratitude, the unspoken bond between us spill across my face. She was the same as always, collected, untouchable, her voice steady as she guided us through the last lecture of the semester. To anyone else, she was only a teacher. But to me, she had become so much more. It wasn't until later, when the building had emptied and the night had settled in, that I waited outside. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain from earlier in the evening. Street lights hummed overhead, their glow painting long shadows across the pavement. I shoved my hands in my pockets, pacing slowly, the nerves in my chest a steady drumbeat. And then she appeared. Her heels clicked softly against the steps as she walked out, her coat pulled tightly around her shoulders against the night breeze. She paused when she saw me, surprise flickering across her face before softening into something warmer. "You're still here," she said quietly. "I wanted to thank you," I replied. My voice felt rough, uncertain, but honest. "For everything. Not just for helping me pass." For a moment, she didn't answer. The silence stretched, filled only by the hum of the streetlight and the distant sound of a car passing. Then she stepped closer, her coat brushing lightly against my arm as she slipped her hand into mine. Her touch was gentle, deliberate, steady. Not the accidental brushes of the past, not the hesitant pauses we had lived in for weeks. This was a choice. I exhaled slowly, feeling the warmth of her palm against mine, the way her fingers curled with quiet certainty. She leaned her head against my shoulder, her cheek resting softly against me. For a moment, I could feel her heartbeat, steady and calm, matching the rhythm of my own. No words were needed. Not about the class, not about what it had taken to get here, not about the risks that still existed beyond this quiet street. All of that could wait. In that moment, all that mattered was the simplicity of us, standing side by side, her hand in mine, her head resting against me. I had passed the class. But more than that, I had found something I hadn't been looking for, something far greater than a grade. I had found her, and for the first time, I realized she had found me too.